All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our session titled "From Concept to Closet: Advancing Sustainability in Fashion Apparel." My name is Yannis Belos. I am an associate professor of Information Systems and Operations Management at the Costello College of Business, and I am also the MBA program director. I will be moderating this panel, which, as evidenced by the title, will focus on sustainability, specifically in the context of fashion apparel and, more broadly speaking, retail. Our four panelists will help us take a holistic view of sustainability and touch both on challenges and opportunities. With no further delay, I would like to introduce our panelists, which have joined this session today. I would like to start with Madison Pallen Michelle Klein. She's designer at Coach. As a sustainability specialist and designer, Madison aims at shifting the paradigm of the fashion industry by utilizing a decade of professional experience across diverse industries and products. She's passionate about designing and implementing circular systems for textile waste. She has an exceptional reputation for garnering support, working to bring ideas from conceptualization to implementation, and a proven ability to collaborate and manage multiple projects simultaneously. Welcome, Madison, to our panel. Second, I would like to introduce Anjali Purohit. Anjali is a designer, entrepreneur, and founder of Studio Variously, an award-winning brand and design studio based in Michigan. Studio Variously pursues intentional craftsmanship and sustainable design by collaborating with artisan clusters in India, Nepal, and Peru for all ethical manufacturing choices. Anjali has worked for more than 15 years for design studios, fashion brands, and exhibited in shows across the world. For Anjali, beauty lies in slow-made textiles that bring people and their cultural stories together. Welcome, Anjali. Next, Sabrina Snow. Sabrina is a startup Swiss Army knife who leads all new partnerships for Hyde. She is the VP of Partnerships and Sustainability there. She has a background in building dynamic teams with the American fashion brand Landscape, merchandising, and sustainability. Sabrina has an MBA from Rutgers in fashion and sustainability and combines her knack for building relationships and strategic partnerships with driving community engagement to maximize brand awareness. Sabrina met the other two panelists, Madison and Anjali, through her volunteer work at Fashion Revolution USA, organizing community events, managing operations, and building the leadership team and board of directors. Welcome, Sabrina. And last but not least, Sri Kancherla, Director of Global Sustainability at Kearney. Throughout her career as an advisor and global business strategy in the evolving corporate sustainability sector, Sri has fueled environmental, social, and governance initiatives for diverse industries. She brings over 20 years of dedicated expertise in building new ESG programs. In her current role at Kearney, she steers business advisory and developing sustainability practices, social impact, and ESG projects for Fortune 500 clients. She's also a former student and graduate of the Costello MBA program. I would like to welcome again all our panelists. I invite you to turn on your cameras. And I should say to our audience, at any point, if you have any questions, please feel free to add them in the Q&A section. And if we have time at the end of this panel, we will do our best to address them. Thank you. All right, to kickstart this panel, that's a question that I have for all the panelists. You all have had an interesting and expansive career focusing on sustainable fashion and textiles, and more broadly speaking, sustainable business practices. I'm wondering when and how did you develop an interest in this space? Or when and how did you start working on sustainability-related issues and opportunities in your career? Sabrina, if you don't mind, you can start us with this.
Happy to get started. Thank you for having me. So my background within the American brand landscape kind of showed me from an internal perspective that the systems that we were using to manage people and processes, especially in how we went about acquiring apparel and all of that, obviously, with some brands, they're using data or technology that is adopted across all of the maybe physical stores. And I just had noticed that was very out of date. And then, during the pandemic, I think that a lot of people really got a chance to see and slow down and understand what was going on in the world around them. And that allowed us to see a little bit more on, who was producing what, how those people were getting treated, and specifically in the garment worker space. So that was at the same time that I was getting my master's degree at Rutgers and doing a lot of research and information, and finding out how, garment workers were being treated, how they were being paid, how they were not being paid, and really solidified for me that coming out of that experience and everything happening with the world, that I could not in good conscience work for a brand that wasn't treating their workers and the planet well. So that's just a little bit of kind of how I got started in the sustainability space, and got a chance to kind of kickstart with an organization like Fashion Revolution.
Thank you, Sabrina. How about you, Madison?
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. It's so nice to be here with everyone. So for me, I kind of, it's similar to Sabrina when it comes to thinking about, garment workers' rights along that line. But I have a design background, and I'm in New York City. I don't know if you can hear the sirens behind me. They feel very loud at this moment. But so in my path in design, for a few of the companies that I worked with in the beginning, I found myself as an assistant designer back then having to mark a lot of boxes for incineration, whether that was incorporating textile waste just from sampling, bought samples that we were referencing. And so that was kind of, after marking so many boxes for incineration, it really started to get me questioning, like, why is there so much waste? What are we doing with all of this? And how can I change that? And so I ended up getting a certificate from FIT in sustainable design entrepreneurship along the same time that I started trying to upcycle clothing from my grandfather's closet when he passed away, because again, I saw a closet of great items, but most likely would go to waste. And so it kind of is just taking me on this like exploration through sustainable practices, then circular design initiatives, and really just how much we're overproducing in this world, and how much we really could take a step back and really look at our actions from a psychological standpoint down into just a best practices. So that's been kind of my overarching, practice within this field.
Thank you, Madison. Anjali.
Sorry, thank you so much for having me. So for me, it has been kind of like two parallel journeys. One is a little bit dating back in 2001 when my home state of Gujarat in India was struck by one of the worst earthquakes. And I was a design student then in Delhi, and we were one of the small batches of students relocated to the epicenter to revive the craftsmen and the clusters that were hit by the earthquake. And that time I almost spent like, as I don't think so, I was 20 even back then. So, almost 3 to 4 months with the artisans in their setup, in their social setup, trying to revive what was left with them, and to kind of get them back to the cycle of, making products. And I think that was like a very ground zero level experience at that age. And then, you are like studying design in a very big city, but then you are here in a village trying to connect with them, even though they are your own people. But at the same time, from the urban and rural setup, it makes a very big difference, especially at that time in 2001. So that was one of the, I think, the pivotal moments when I experienced firsthand what it, means to be in their setup, like socially as well. But then when I started working, I was working with big capacity suppliers, buying houses, who would work for brands in Europe and US as well. And we used to do, like Madison said, like, large capacity collections. There were container loads of very, very micro seasonal collections being shipped every other month. And that kind of gave me an overview about the wastage, dead stock, overproduction, very short seasonal cycles, things like that in fashion mainly. And I think these two kind of parallel running experiences, was the highlight in my career, where I felt that, if I were to start my own business one day, I'd rather go this way than the other way. And also try and see if I can, like, exclusively work with artisans for all manufacturing abilities. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Anjali. Sri.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's an exciting panel. So my background actually started off in international human rights law. That's where my passion was, and trying to find out ways to mitigate any issues and really uplift humanity. So I started off with that, and then slowly along the way on my 20-year journey, I came across social entrepreneurship. That was back in 2008, and lived in India as well, and started to work with entrepreneurs on building their social enterprises. And in that experience, I was working very closely with retail companies on a large scale, as well as with social enterprises that are working with women artisans, working on design as well. And so my role was really trying to bridge that gap between the artisans on the ground, the entrepreneurs, as well as the multinationals that are really trying to link up with them. And so in that process, I recognized a major thing, which is that the women, the various laborers that are there, they need to have the fair wages, they have to have the right conditions, and they really have the creativity to create something really beautiful if we can work with them. So my journey continued, and then I went off to live in sub-Saharan Africa, where I worked in the same way, working with fashion retail clients from the US, UK, and Europe, and getting more services on the ground and bridging that gap on human rights and environmental issues within the supply chain. And then currently now advising companies on that. So it's been a journey from being on the ground and recognizing where the issue is and trying to be that voice to take it to the multinationals that are really incorporating and really working on this level.
Thank you, Sri, and thank Sabrina, Madison, and Anjali. There is a common thread here, right? Commitment to do well by doing good, and a commitment and a passion. So definitely appreciate this. So let me. I have prepared some questions for you, tailored perhaps a little bit more to the different experiences and backgrounds that you bring you bring to the table today. So, Anjali, I want to start with you. A big part of your work is focused on the top of the value chain, specifically on design collaboration with handworkers economy in the context of combining materials and techniques that are sustainable and with heritage value for the modern market. Can you tell us more about your experience, the opportunities and challenges you have experienced in this space?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like I feel like currently at this time, like in 2024, in terms of looking back in the past 15-20 years that I have worked with artisans, the challenges in terms of communication used to be a major one. Previously, which I feel right now has, kind of that barrier has been crossed like really well, especially because of, WhatsApp and, all the, we are able to make phone calls so easily and at such a cheap, cost, or maybe free. So I feel communication wise, you are able to work remotely much more easily, especially when you are able to identify the correct people, the correct clusters and artisans to work with. That has definitely improved a lot. And it's almost like having your own remote team. Where you can get daily updates, you can work on the designs, discuss all the problems, improvise as well. So when I started my company, I used to make more in-person visits, on-site visits, which now I see that, we technically we don't need it, because once you also have a good relationship of working together and they understand the quality standards that I'm looking for, we are able to devise those phases much better. I feel like in terms of like challenges, mainly one of the key challenges, logistics, which also is improving. But I would say that, especially as an independent designer, the costs of logistics post pandemic has been like, hitting the roof for everybody. And the shortage of, the raw materials, and timing it well with your collections, with, any kind of releases, design releases, participation. So I feel in terms of challenges, that is probably like the key challenge for both, like, artisans in on one side, like who are manufacturing, and myself on this side, from the business end of things. And I feel in terms of possibilities, especially the consumer is more than ready to learn about, sustainability and how we can incorporate that at various levels. Of course, there is no perfect blueprint, that anybody can click on all the, boxes. But at the same time, as far as there is improvisation involved, and, you're able to keep things as transparent as possible, people definitely care, when they learn about how things are made, who is making things. That level of transparency really matters for me, because I do both B2B and B2C. Even my buyers who are showroom owners or store owners are more than eager to learn, and, have a proper, discussion about what came from where, not just like what deal am I getting, how the product is priced, but they want to know the whole backstory. They want to know who is involved in this entire supply chain, how are they impacted. And at the same time, when I'm working with retail clients, direct to retail clients, they are also equally interested and appreciate the fact that, for example, if I work on pre-orders, I keep them posted about every step in the process of manufacturing, because I work directly. I have no middlemen between me and my artisans. So I'm able to have that access to images, to videos, to any kind of delays, things like that. So I feel like these are three main aspects between communication, logistics, and, the market being ready for it, for sure, in terms of like possibilities, challenges. Yeah.
Just a follow-up question. I'm wondering, I mean, you mentioned an increase that customers, whether are B2B or B2C customers, they're increasingly showing appreciation and interest in learning more about where the material, where the product is coming from. Have you seen also in that being translated in more willingness to pay, to reward vendors or retailers or people who actually can prove that they are ethically sourcing, producing products?
Yeah, because we are able to, break down the number of man hours, or, the hours that it takes to make that particular, for example, rug or throw, or a scarf. And also, what are the certification involved, in terms of the dyes being used, the quality of the raw materials, also the time taken for the design end of things, because that's also a very important part of costing. And I feel also when, the product is placed in a suitable market, you are able to receive that kind of customer, interaction as well. So I feel, I mean, it's always a work in progress, because there are also some buyers who would love the look and feel, like especially the look of the product, but then they want to, substitute the material, because material cost is one of the key costs of any sustainable product right now in the industry. And it is for a reason, because you are taking more care in how things are made. For example, something like hand spun cotton is going to be always costing more than machine spun cotton. And when then you go to, organic cotton, it'll be a different cost. So similarly, if I'm doing machine spun merino versus hand spun merino, it's actual people, women who are involved in spinning the yarn for hours together, in the entire process. I do make like a lot of times, there have been like short documentaries that we have, produced in collaboration with creative teams in India and Nepal as well, and release that every few, like a few cycles. And I think that has been also very helpful in showcasing the brand story, where things are coming from, the impact it's making in their lives. Yeah.
And the fact that you work directly with the workers, the producers, you don't have those layers Oh,
Yes.
you don't have a supplier who has another supplier who depends on other
Yeah.
suppliers, so you can make you
Yeah.
have this visibility that's much needed necessary to make that case, and which I mean typical supply chains are
Yeah.
they cannot provide this benefit. Thank you, Anjali.
Thank you.
So, Sri, in your role as Global Director of Sustainability at Kearney, you have worked at the intersection of business and sustainability across sectors and at different stages in the value chain. What are some challenges at this intersection that are perhaps unique or more prominent in the fashion, textile, and more broadly speaking, retail space?
Mhm. So I think one thing for sure is that consumer lens is really important, how the consumer looks at fashion. And we always have this battle between the fast fashion, the fashion luxury, the other aspects of fashion. So I think that the companies have to figure out where they are playing, and also not to be grouped in certain areas if they're also trying to keep their brand image. So that's one piece that I think is very unique to the fashion industry when we think about sustainability, is the brand image, and of course, how we work around greenwashing around that. Now, in terms of the major issues, and this would span across broadly with industries, but more specifically within fashion, is obviously going to be around your materials, the kind of materials that are being used, how it's being produced, because that is a scope 3 issue as well as a human rights issue. So for example, Anjali is working on some of the human rights issues that could happen within the supply chain and the value chain when we don't have the right business models working with artisans. So companies, when they are working with artisans or working with labor workers or garment workers, for example, is how are we creating a business model that is conducive for better wages, that is also conducive for their health, and really looking in that level of the supply chain. So that's one issue they have to look at. Of course, regulation is an impetus, consumer sentiment is an impetus, and of course, reputational risk, and of course, their own ethics and values around that we have to push for. So that's one aspect that I think, or a major aspect that companies are having to address. Now, another one is waste. So as we know, there's a lot of waste within the garment industry, within retail and fashion, whether it's scraps of material or like what Madison is working with leather. So huge aspect is going to be, what do you do with that waste? And so now we're finding a lot of major companies are taking that waste and converting it into newer garments or newer apparel or better fashion, and they even have their own branded line that would go for a consumer that is more conscious in that way. So I think that we are seeing a lot more of issues coming around waste and how to mitigate waste. Human rights, again, I touched upon, and then traceability. Where is this coming from? Why is this important? Huge in the fashion industry. Cotton, is it coming from a region that is abused, has human rights abuses, for example? How much water is being used when we are extracting the cotton? These are all issues that will come up. Leather manufacturing, the emissions that are coming with that. Chemical dyes, I think that Anjali touched upon that. The dyes that come in the chemicals not only affect the way that we work or the way that we use the material, but also the garment workers that are touching the material and the waterways in which they are facing. So when you look at it from a multinational perspective, they're solving for ESG, which is their compliance. They're also solving to be more sustainable. And so when we look at this supply chain, these are the various aspects that they're going to have to look at. And traceability is big on that, because what happens throughout that supply chain until it gets to the consumer.
So do you think that I mean, you mentioned many different factors here, right? Do you think that compliance is the main driver? Consumer pressure is the main driver? What seems to be the one of the main factor, or the first factor, that the force that pushes companies to start thinking a little bit more seriously about those things?
Well, I think the impetus has been this whole piece around ESG and having to comply around ESG and report around ESG. So I think that has really made companies put a lens on this aspect of their supply chain. Now, what makes the company decide and how far they want to go in making differences or creating different business models or whatever it may be might start with regulation. However, there are companies that are at different phases of their journey. So I think depending on the phase of the journey that they are in, whether it is already they have already been doing things and they want to get to the next level, or if this is new to them. I find that in the fashion industry, a large part is right now happening around regulation, because there's new regulation around human rights issues. There's a new regulation, I think, coming out in New York and California for the fashion industry as well. So we're seeing a lot of it being driven by regulation. But again, I think it's going to be an interesting twist what happens with Gen Z and whether or not they're going to push for this as well.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Sri. Madison, many times when we teach our MBA students about things at the intersection of sustainability and business, one thing that we tend to talk about a lot, and which is increasingly an area of interest these days, is circularity. I know that Coachtopia is very active in this space. Can you perhaps share how Coachtopia is pursuing circular strategies? What are some challenges and successes you have encountered in implementing? And something that we have not really touched about yet is scaling. Scaling successfully scaling environmental initiatives and sustainable business models and practices.
Yeah. I mean, also just to go off of what Sri was saying, you know, talking about Gen Z, that was a big inspiration for our Coachtopia line, because we do see them starting to be a lot more interested in this space of sustainability, of resale, and things like that. And so that is, you know, Coachtopia's main customer is the Gen Z customer, which is very fun to design for. So yeah, so we work on a circular design system, right? And most of the industry right now is based off of the linear design system, where it's take, make, waste. And we're doing it in a way where it's, you know, there is the upcycling and there's resale and there's all of those parts, but it's just trying to keep a product in this circle as long as possible before its end of life. But then we're taking it a step further, where we're in a linear system. The end of life is always a landfill. Sorry, I'm choking a little bit. Always the landfill. Whereas ours, it's already thinking when we're designing what that end of life is and how we can reuse that material into something else. So we design with monomateriality in mind, meaning that every single piece of the garment is like 100% rPET, so 100% recycled polyester. Nothing we design with is virgin material. It's always recycled. So we are already starting from that point. So we're not taking new from the earth. And then from there, when something is made monomaterial, it is so much easier for the select textile recycling companies that are existing right now in the States to recycle the pieces. So a lot of these places are able to take the materials back, take garments, but then they're resorting it into reselling it, shipping it overseas, or then certain ones that have a higher percentage of cotton or polyester, they are able to make into new textiles, which is very exciting. So the more we design with that mindset of making it all one material, the easier it is to then recycle it into something new. Another thing that we work with that kind of got brought up already is waste. So we're all about making from waste. So whether that is sourcing waste from the factories that we work with, or kind of working in this ecosystem loop with Mainline Coach, since we are a sub-brand, we are always trying to figure out how we can actually design with waste before creating new. And that goes for handbags and ready to wear. You know, some of the challenges that we have had with just making it bigger, and I saw that when I was doing my own upcycling work, is kind of how to scale upcycled product, because in the end, cost is still extremely important, and you don't want to add too much extra labor and labor-intensive cost onto a product that you're trying to upcycle. So that is a big challenge sometimes, but something that we are really working through. And it's also just about kind of how we are able to get the consumer to understand what we're doing. So we have NFC chips on all of the product, where they can scan it with their phone and learn about the carbon reductions on the product, kind of the traceability of how the product was made and things like that too. So those are kind of our big picture initiatives around circular design. I think that it's really important that the whole industry starts to think in this way, because right now we're just overproducing so much without a true end of life. And again, even if we keep making things with sustainable mindset in mind, which is great, doing preferred materials is better, but in the end, we still don't know what the life cycle end is unless it is like landfill. So we have to keep trying to think of, once this product is made, is there a new design already built into that product so we know when we get it back? Because that's another thing that Coachtopia has, is a specific take back program. So we can get that garment back and we already kind of know what the next steps is with it. So yeah.
So actually, I'm glad that you mentioned this, because as you were describing your strategies, I kept thinking that, oftentimes we talk about last mile delivery problems, right? But now in this case, I was thinking that there is a challenge here, the reverse first mile, right? How do you convince the customer to take the extra step to return that product? Have you been able to make progress there, or any advice, any initiatives or incentives that seem to have worked well?
Yeah, there is always an incentive, whether it's a certain amount off of the next piece that you bought. Things like that have always seemed to be working when it comes to take back programs. But it's just really like getting to know your consumer and having that open like dialogue. So we have like a special community of Gen Z that we work with, where we even have them come in and look at our products and kind of work with us as we design and think through all of this. So we have that great community aspect with it. I think just getting the word out through social media too is something that always really helps. But yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's just really trying to keep having that open dialect as to making sure that people understand the importance of taking care of their garments and what to do with it at the end of the life. And I really do think that having that NFC chip too, in case a product gets handed down through a secondhand retailer like Poshmark or Depop, then they still have that accessibility to kind of learn about what that product is and where it needs to go next. But also to me, in the end, with all of these initiatives that we're putting forth, it still has to be an amazing product or it doesn't matter. So the design still has to be there. It has to be intriguing. You want somebody to still want to buy it, to want to wear it, use it as long as possible, or else it doesn't matter in the end that we're even trying to make this change.
Right, that's a very good point. I'm wondering also, do you facilitate? I mean, we know, with all those different platforms, Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, Rent a Runway, and I mean, successful platforms. Do you? I know that some companies are experimenting with this idea of having customers sell their products, or kind of share or sell products that are no longer theirs and use it to someone else. Have you had any thoughts or any work in this space in facilitating that kind of sharing or exchange?
I haven't, and the most that I feel like I can speak to that really is not necessarily selling to another platform like Rent the Runway, but I will say Coach has an amazing program called Coach Reloved, where whenever somebody sends in their handbags and maybe they decide they don't want it fixed, because we do repairs. We have a whole workshop in New Jersey, which is amazing. We actually have a team that takes all of those one-off bags and redesigns them and upcycles them into a whole new design, and we resell them on our own platform. So that's kind of the most I've had with that. But I do think that, any way that you can resell, keep a product circled in a new life as long as possible is always the best way to go.
Thank you, Madison. So Sabrina, circularity, or the pursuit of circularity, seems to be, I mean, it is a potential catalyst towards a more sustainable fashion, right? I know that Hyde's mission is to use technology as another catalyst. Can you tell us more about Hyde's work in this space?
Definitely. One thing that I do want to highlight that I think everyone has mentioned in this panel so far is transparency. And while transparency is important, of course, for the consumer, what we have to keep in mind from a business perspective, which I know Sri knows a lot about as well, is that if it's not benefiting the company's bottom line, it's not going to be something that they're going to begin or initiate, if you will, right? Hyde utilizes technology to help brands make better decisions when it comes to demand and forecasting. So, for example, we have partnered with companies like Calvin Klein, Cavalli Class, and told them we know that this inventory of yours already exists. We don't need you to make anything new. What we want to do is take your existing inventory and put it in our boxes. We know for a fact that we have a demand for it based on these verticals or pillars of our business. We want to put it in, these subscription boxes for men that have told us that they need them, and that allows that to, that product or that merchandise to be seen through maybe a new lens or through a new customer acquisition. And the renter gets a chance to have the item for 30 days. If they love it, they keep it and buy it. And if not, they send it back and they rent something new for the next month. That technology is then used and shared with a brand so that the brand can make a better decision going into the next fashion cycle or season. We can show them, hey, you have from, maybe this zip code or this area, this part of the country, these particular men are saying that they need this shirt or this pair of pants for this area or this purpose. And knowing that information, that can keep them from mass producing items that, eventually end up in an off-price store or being sold at MSRP. And ultimately, our goal is to keep these brands from considering waste as an option, right? We want the landfill to be the last resort, or we don't want that to be the resort at all, right? And so for a lot of brands, that's something that they're, I think, trying to understand a little bit more or get in front of. And kind of going back to that transparency piece I mentioned at the beginning, it's important for us to put that information or that data in front of the consumer so that they can see, as Madison had mentioned, where this, item or garment started to where it is now.
And I know that you have been, I'm wondering as I hear you talk, I know that you, at Hyde, I mean, you apply artificial intelligence, right? AI models to, what is the potential, what is the promise here compared to, a couple of years ago when, I mean, we kind of were aware of AI, something is in the works and developing. What is the true potential? What are the opportunities that you see when it comes to applying AI? And this is something that can be used by big name corporations only. How accessible, approachable, feasible will be for an average or smaller retailer to use those technological tools that were not available 1 or 2 years ago?
That's a great question. I think something that's hard to understand from maybe a consumer or even a business perspective sometimes is, earlier in this panel, when I was introducing myself, I mentioned that I worked for some American brands that were really behind in certain processes. And when I mean behind, I mean the training videos for the position that I had were from the 1980s. And this is a brand that has like 3,400 plus stores around the country and then even more around the world. What happens typically when it comes to this example is that brands will adopt some type of process and then they will utilize it until basically somebody somewhere in maybe the business landscape has shown them that something new needs to be adopted. And what we're seeing in the fashion industry and kind of the impetus of Hyde is that the fashion industry in general is very behind in demand and forecasting. We have all of these companies out here producing. I'm sure you've gone into a department store or seen at an off-price store. There are hundreds of clothes sitting on a rack that people are just not shopping, right? You can see people in line buying things, but that doesn't mean they're buying everything in the store. That means we're mass producing things that, maybe we'll produce 10 shirts in the hope that somebody buys one. Well, Hyde wants to reduce that. And this technology or this AI that you mentioned is really, again, for us to partner with the brands that we are putting in our boxes and other brands maybe that we are in partnership with to help them make better demand and forecasting decisions so that maybe next fashion season they only produce what the client is actually telling them that they need. Or, maybe they're going into a season where they're increasing their efforts in ESG or sustainable practices. So they're partnering with maybe artisans or, maybe designers who have this upcycle or this more sustainable approach. And they're maybe spending more time and resources on making sure it's the right product so the customer keeps it longer. I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely, thank you. I know we have a few minutes left. I have one more question for everyone, but I also want to take this opportunity and ask the audience to submit any questions they have through the Q&A section. As the audience is thinking about any questions that I want to ask you, one more question to everyone. What's next, right? What do you see as the next frontier for sustainable fashion and retail? What are some innovative strategies that we should be keeping an eye on?
I'm going to jump in here for a second. I think that is a loaded question, but I think we can answer it to some extent. I think going back to transparency, that seems to be the hot word for 2024 in the sustainability space and in fashion in general. You'll see a lot of legislation being passed in the EU, which they're ahead. The US usually follows behind or follows suit, sometimes quite a bit after or shortly after what the EU is doing. You'll see a lot of legislation being passed on transparency around practices, right? And that could mean, garment workers' rights, or that could mean protecting the planet specifically. So paying attention to things like the Green New Deal or the CSDDD, which is basically around making sure that brands are actually doing what they're saying they're doing. If they are reporting that their products are being made, whether it's a consumer goods brand or a fashion brand, if their products are being made in a certain part of the world, the people who live in that part of the world are getting paid fair wages, they're not damaging the planet. It's getting down to the point where one specific bill actually that was passed a couple of years ago that's being initiated now, the Corporate Social Due Diligence Directive in the EU, affects more than just the United States, brands around the world. If you have over 500 employees, you will be instructed to report or give information to everything from the top down in your supply chain practices, anything like that, because not only are you as the brand going to be responsible for that transparency, but investors in your brand are going to be responsible for whether or not you are actually upholding sustainable practices. So paying attention to those things, I think, is really important. And I think that industry is going to be moving more in a direction of what Sheree mentioned at the beginning, which is, what is it that brands are being forced to do? And then I want to touch back on, if this is affecting a business's bottom line, then obviously they're going to feel that push, and that's going to be the catalyst that moves them forward, right? Is it something that is going to help grow their business, or do they have to do it because this is where the industry is headed? And not only that, will they have to pay some type of penalty or, change their practices to be able to stay in business?
Business case for sustainability. It's always about the business case for sustainability.
Yep.
I see a couple of questions from the audience, but I'm wondering if any of the other panelists have any thoughts about what's next before I bring up the questions from the audience.
I'll build off of what Sabrina said with the CSDDD. What it has actually done is put in place companies now really having to look deeper into their value chain, all the way down to who are the garment worker, who are the artisans, everything. This is an interesting time in fashion where we're bringing in technology. I think we're going to see a lot of technology really push the fashion industry to a different level, that they've had to address these issues for decades. But with the use of AI and blockchain, there's a lot more visibility into the supply chains, the value chain, and what is actually the data that is happening. So I think it'll be an interesting intersection. And it's not just that piece of how companies have to report, but in the past, I actually even worked with IKEA and artisans in India. And the artisans, they built their own platform where they could work with the designers from IKEA, work with the artisans, have their own co-op, they have their own, they work with the designers, they cut out that middle piece. And so using that technology, everybody has a cell phone. So this is a great thing that's going to happen now within the fashion industry if we can really utilize technology for what it is.
Thank you. So go ahead, Madison.
Oh, I quickly just to add on, because exactly what both of you are already saying, there's also some EPR bills in the work, specifically in California and New York, that I think we'll be seeing more of, that will be forcing, businesses to really look at the whole life cycle of their products. And so I think that, along with just textile to textile recycling, are two of the things that I'm the most excited for, that will be changing the industry for better.
We have a couple of minutes left, so I want to mention, actually, I see interestingly that some of our questions are around their conversion to certain areas. So there are two questions regarding about when it comes to about providing giving to less fortunate. So when it comes to sustainability in fashion, there is a question on to whether it has been researched on how often we give to the less fortunate and still make the measures sustainable. For instance, the less fortunate or homeless are in the models for give back programs. A similar question was asked, was like, it's unfortunate that we have almost 700K homeless in the US that need clothing. How does providing clothing to the homeless fit in the circular model, or is this something mostly focused as secondary value? There is an interesting intersection here, right? We talk about circularity and social aspects and social responsibility. I'm wondering if any of you have any experience or thoughts at this intersection.
I know that I'll just speak to like some experience, but I think that's a great question. And I do think that it's important that we are, still able to help out in that aspect. I do think it's important to still kind of be able to have systems in place, so that once those garments, even if they're given to the homeless, they're going to have an end of life at some point too. And my hope is just that they don't end up in the landfill. So whether that's, investing again more into textile to textile recycling systems, and some of those are starting to use more AI as well to help with the sorting process. I think that we should be also helping give to the homeless. But I want a system in a world where that, that doesn't just go to the landfill at the end of life either. I know that the company Bombas, they do for every pair of socks sold, a pair to get donated to the homeless. And I think that that's a great initiative and way of doing things. And I believe too that it's always like black socks. So I think that there is a system where we could have, sometimes right now with textile to textile recycling, it's a little bit harder to control maybe the colors that you're creating, things like that. So I think that there is a way that we could incorporate things like that, whether it's taking back clothing and turning it into just pairs of black socks to be able to give to the homeless, or you can create shoddy from materials that then you can use as stuffing for pillows or blankets. So I do think that there's probably a bigger landscape where we could be addressing this problem at the same time by utilizing waste that's already there.
Makes perfect sense. We are at time. I would like to thank our panelists for these lively conversations. I am going to apologize to the audience for the ones who submitted a question that I didn't get a chance to address. There are a couple of AI technical questions that, Sabrina, I think I'm going to forward your way at the end of the session. But if any of the audience has any submitted any questions that we didn't get a chance to address, or if they come up with more questions, please feel free to email them directly to me, and I'm going to forward them to our esteemed panelists. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to continuing the conversations with you. Thank you for the fascinating and impactful work that you are doing in this space. It's been a pleasure and an honor to moderate this panel.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.